The April 28th, 2021 Minneapolis Board of Estimate and Taxation may now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to a regular meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. I am David Wheeler. I'm president of the BE&T. As we begin, I will note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by members as authorized under Minnesota Statutes Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and the YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and subject to the open meeting law. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll so we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Board Member Fry.
Here.
Board Member French.
Here.
Board Member Bender. Board Member Fletcher. Vice President Becker.
Here.
President Wheeler.
Here.
There are 4 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information system, which is available at limes.minneapolismin.gov. Board members, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Board Member Fry.
Aye.
Board Member French.
Aye.
Board Member Bender. Board Member Fletcher. Vice President Becker.
Aye.
President Wheeler.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
The motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Next is the acceptance of the minutes from the April 14th meeting. May I please have a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Board Member Fry.
Aye.
Board Member French.
Aye.
Board Member Bender. Board Member Fletcher. Vice President Becker.
Aye.
President Wheeler.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
The motion passes and the minutes are accepted as presented. Item 4 on the agenda is a presentation on assessments and market valuations. I'll invite Rebecca Malmquist, interim city assessor, to give us that presentation. Rebecca.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the Board of Estimate and Taxation for providing us this time to share some highlights of the 2021 assessment with you. I do have 2 members of our leadership team here with us, Nancy Wojak and Brian Messer, should they be needed to answer additional questions. If we can please move to the next slide. So in the interest of time, the slides we are presenting to you today are a selection from the full report that can be found on the website. This is the full assessment report that was presented in March. I do encourage you to review the full report. First, a high-level summary and reminders about the assessment. We recently completed the January 2nd, 2021 assessment of estimated market values for approximately 125,000 taxable properties. This is an annual process as dictated in state statute. The valuation or the notices of valuation classification, commonly known as the value notices, were mailed in the middle of March. It is important to remind everyone that the 2021 estimated market values are used to calculate the 2022 taxes. I'll talk more about that in a moment. We value in 1 year, the budget and levy are set, and then the taxes are payable in the following year. We know this can be confusing because property tax statements are mailed at approximately the same time as value notices. The payable 2021 property tax statements that owners received were used based on the 2020 assessed market value. Another important reminder is that the data we use to set the annual assessment is also dictated by the state statute. For the January 2nd, 2021 assessment, we analyzed sales that occurred between October of 2019 and September of 2020. So assessors somewhat act as historians where we look back at what has happened and then we set the assessment. Next slide, please. This is a timeline of the 2021 assessment and how it affects, how it really translates into taxation. So if we first start by looking at the assessment date about 1/3 of the way through the screen of January 2nd, 2021, it's the blue arrow. To determine the 2021 assessment, we, again, as dictated by statute, use sales that transacted between October 1st, 2019 and September 30th, 2020. That's those green arrows to the left of the assessment date. We set the assessment, and as indicated in orange, we mail the value notices and launch into the appeal season, which really takes us through June. So in March, we mail the value notices. We go through the local Board of Appeal process and the County Board of Appeal process, and that ends in June. As indicated in purple at the top there, the budgeting for the next year begins in approximately May, but I think, you know, if you'd ask the mayor, I think we started considerably sooner this year, and that will run through the first week of December when the budget is adopted. In mid-October, there's a snapshot of all values that is taken, and those values are used to calculate the estimate of taxes using the proposed levies from all of the taxing authorities, the school, the city, county, watershed, etc. The county does this calculation and then mails the truth in taxation notices. This is, there is information about attending the different taxing authority truth in taxation meetings on that notice. And those meetings adjourn, and then the budgets are adopted in December. Tax statements are mailed in March. This is all the section in red on the right-hand side of the screen. And the first half of taxes are due May 15th, and the second half of taxes are due in October 15th. This exercise is all to point out, but by the time a property owner pays their second half taxes, it is based on data that we use to value properties that is approximately 3 years old. And the system is really purposely set up that way so that the values can be set, people can appeal, the taxing authorities can work on their budgets, set a proposed levy, and then move through the actual tax statements and tax collection. Next slide, please. This is a high-level overview of the city's estimated market value. The city's estimated market value is, it says 60.0 there, but it's about, actually rounded, it's about $60.1 billion for 2021. Next slide, please. This slide is a visualization of the breakdown of the 3 major property type categories by total value and then translating into tax capacity. So a very simplistic explanation of how values translate to taxes is that the assessor's office determines the estimated market value. Then exclusions are deducted from the market value to calculate a taxable value. The most common exclusion that people know about is the homestead exclusion. And then one of more of the state's 40 classification rates are applied to the taxable market value. All of the taxing authority tax rates are then applied to the tax capacity and referendum market value to collect the tax. Because the classification rate for commercial properties is higher than the classification rate for residential and apartment, there is a shift when we move from the estimated market value on the right to tax capacity, or market value on the left to tax capacity on the right. You can see here residential values on the left comprise nearly 60% of the total city EMV. However, when tax rates are applied, the residential portion of tax capacity decreases to just under 50%. and there is a shift in commercial from 20% of the value to 31% of the tax capacity. An explanation of this can be found on our video on the city's YouTube page. Next slide, please. This slide is a historical view of the city's total estimated market value, broken down into 3 major property type categories again: commercial industrial in blue, apartment in orange, and residential in green. The overall estimated market value, or EMV, for the city increased by just about 2.7% to just over $60 billion. This is the lowest percent change we've seen since 2013. You can see that the residential and apartment values increased as a proportion of the total value, and the commercial industrial decreased as a percentage. It isn't indicated here, however, I did want to mention that there was more than $1.2 billion in new construction added in 2021, which makes up the majority of the value increase in the city. If it wasn't for this new construction, especially approximately $850 million in apartment new construction, then the overall market value would have been close to flat. The decreases in commercial industrial apartment values almost canceled out the increase in residential values without the new construction. Next slide, please. This slide is a distribution of the estimated market value by community. It's broken down again into the 3 major property type categories. And then there is also a percentage at the top of each bar that represents the change from last year. So you'll see that all but the central community saw increases in market value. However, the central community saw a decrease of 2%. The next slide, please. This slide illustrates the comparison of the median sale price to the median market value for residential properties. These lines should be close together and definitely going in the same direction, so that you can see here that this measurement has been improving for our assessment. Next slide, please. Again, this is an illustration of the residential properties and the breakdown of percent change. So in dark blue, you'll see that about 10%, 11% of properties saw a decrease in their value. 13% saw no change. About 1/4 saw an increase of 0 to 5. Another quarter saw an increase of 5 to 10%. 16.8% of properties saw an increase of 10 to 15%, and then 9.5% of properties still saw an increase this year of over 15%. Next slide, please. This is a geographical representation of the aggregate single-family residential change by neighborhood. The largest increases are in the Sumner, Glenwood, Beltrami, and Central Riverside neighborhoods. There were slight decreases in East Harriet and the South Upton neighborhoods. Moving to the next slide, please. Transitioning back to commercial industrial properties, this is a historical view of the commercial industrial market breakdown by the different uses. It has been the first time there has been a decrease in the commercial market value since 2011. You'll see here, indicated in orange at the bottom, our hotel properties saw a significant increase from 9% to 7%. I believe the overall, if we just look at the hotel values from 20 to 21, the values decreased over 20% for our hotel market. We're seeing very, very strong negative indicators for our hotel market as far as occupancy and daily rate. Would you like me to pause for questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
And I have a question too.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Fry.
Thank you. Yes, I don't see the hands, but that's okay. Just tell me and we'll let you go. I think the mayor had the first question.
Yeah, I've got it in the chat. Director, You said it was the first time that we've seen a decrease since 2011. I realize that's the only data that we have, but it doesn't even look like there was a decrease in 2011. Are we aware of there ever being a decrease before?
Mayor Fry, it's not on this screen, but if we compared 2010 to 2011, you would have seen that there was a decrease.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
That was the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Becker, you've got the next question.
Yes. Usually this lags a year, right? So we're doing the 2019 values in 2020, the 20 values in 2021. How did hotels get? I assume this is because of the pandemic. So did they apply for reductions last year and get those last year in the first part of the year? Because I'm presuming that we're going to see a lot of reductions this year. Like I assume like city center, I mean, the value of a property is the sum of the rents that you can get off of it. And so city center is going to come forward this year and ask for reductions in its value because it can't rent its property like it did. How are we seeing reductions in 2021 already? Does that make sense? Yes.
President Wheeler and Vice President Becker. So we do look back at what happened in 2020, and we definitely saw indicators in the hotel market and other commercial markets that showed that values should be dropping because people weren't staying in hotels, the daily rates were dropping. And we're seeing that in the office sector as well. The only market that we saw appreciation in was our industrial market, and that's because our industrial properties are so well situated and really being utilized for all of the online shopping and things like that are happening. So we were seeing some of that activity for sure in 2020 in the hotel markets. We've seen some studies that are showing that Minneapolis is one of the hardest hit hospitality industries as far as hotel valuation.
But are we then expecting to see a decline in office and medical in 2022 then because of these appeals that are coming through like literally now? And I apologize. I teach financing cities at the U, which is why I asked for all this detailed information. I'm just trying to understand.
Yes, we could. President Wheeler and Vice President Becker, we do continually monitor every sales transaction that comes in. We do a deep dive verification, talking to the buyer, the seller, the broker, collecting as much information as we can about each transaction. We really talk to all the market players at least once a year. We survey them to hear what they're saying. And so we will continue to monitor what is happening in the office market and the medical market. The medical market we haven't seen such a shift there, but the office market, because there's not people going downtown, they're not utilizing the space, there's drops in rents and people moving out and finding potentially office space in the suburbs. So we will continue to watch that, and we are right now. Obviously, we're only 8 months away from the next assessment, so we will be monitoring that as we prepare for the 2022 assessment.
Thank you so much. I want to be sure to say welcome to Council members Fletcher and Bender, who were able to join us after their meeting. Good to have you here. Thank you. Sorry I didn't get to you earlier, but thank you for being part of this. Are there other questions that we have at this time? If not, thank you so very much for your presentation.
David, I think that there's more to the presentation than this.
Oh,
is that correct, Rebecca?
Yes, I believe there is one more slide.
One more, then let's do the one more slide. Okay.
This speaks to the appeals at the local level. So once we mail value notices, we start hearing from property owners, our appraisers respond to those calls, have conversations. They perform additional analysis on the properties that we're hearing from. And while we heard from It was probably around 1,500 property owners. This year, we only had 545 actual local board appeals, and that's that blue line at the top. We saw a peak in 2019 of almost 1,800 appeals. Last year, we were down to 1,087, and like I said, this year we have 545 local appeals. The local board did adjourn just last Friday, and so now we've moved on to the county board of appeal process. And while it is a county process, our appraisers here in Minneapolis do handle all of those cases, working their way through and presenting to the county board.
Just as a matter of a little bit of humor, when I let people know that I serve on the Board of Estimate and Taxation, they say, "Oh, so you're the one who's responsible for increasing my property taxes." So I have a little opportunity to let them know about that.
Well, it's either you or it's me. So.
Well, Ms. Malmquist, thank you so much for the presentation. It was clear, it was straightforward. Thank you so much for being here before us.
Absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity.
You bet. We have a piece of new business, and that is approving the recruitment and hiring of a part-time Board of Estimate and Taxation staff person to replace our Senior Advisor Finance and Administration position that Alan joined us about 18 months ago, and now he's walking down the hall, as he put it. And I believe that we have Mr. Gatesmith, who helped in the original process, and he's here to answer questions. And Jeff, why don't you talk about the recruitment process, and then I think we're going to have a motion to move forward with the continuation of that.
All right. Thank you, President Wheeler. Yes, we designed a recruiting process when we brought Alan on board about 18 months ago, and it was a fairly effective process that we developed a position description. We drafted some screening criteria. We finalized a panel with members of the board, conducted interviews, made a selection based on those interviews, did background checks, and then developed with our attorney's office an executive employment agreement. And the process was a little bit more extensive last year because there was a lot of work that needed to be done. But as we start this process, if it's approved to go ahead with the process as it's been outlined, then we're looking at about a 6 to 8 week period of time to identify a candidate, and we may be able to move that up a bit. But there's a little bit more work that needs to be done relative to the panel, and I'll be working with President Wheeler and the panel when they're appointed to finalize the process and set some dates for the milestone dates for the process. So that's it.
Okay. Do people have questions of Mr. Gatesmith? I think we need to entertain a motion to approve moving forward.
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Discussion.
Mr. Chair, I did try to put myself in queue.
I'm sorry, go ahead, please, Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you. So I was the one who raised some questions about this and delayed us to today last time. So I just wanted to comment. I did go back and thanks for giving me the time to get caught up on the thinking on this a little bit. I will say that in general, I'm not sure that we've come to the right conclusion here. I'm going to support this for today, and I'm going to support it for today because we're in a place where staff are extremely overburdened at the city trying to adapt to COVID conditions, including hiring freezes and everything else that we've gone through. And so adding another piece of work to their agenda in this round, right now doesn't feel like it makes sense. And frankly, I don't think that either I or staff have the bandwidth to move an alternative. But I do think we might be being a little bit overly precious about the independence of this body and whether staff from the city could support this body moving forward, and we might be able to find some efficiencies, in the future that could help us operate in a more integrated way and maybe save the city a little money in the process. So I want to sort of name that for conversation for future boards of estimate and taxation. I'm going to support this today because I recognize that we need the support, for the remainder of this year, and that Mr. Hoppy is making his move now, so we need to respond to that now. But I do think this is something that future boards probably should revisit.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Does anybody else have a comment that they would like to make?
I'd like to comment.
Yep.
Can you guys hear me?
Ed, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, Lundell. Mr. French, delighted to have you comment.
Yeah. So I guess me being a representative of the park board, I think the independence of the BET serves us well because we would like to have an objective opinion about everything. So I think it's in our best interest for the park board to have an independent advisor. So that's just my little 2 cents.
Well, Ms. Becker.
We are an independent board, just like the park board, and the idea that we could somehow borrow staff just doesn't make sense. That the interests of the Board of Estimate are not necessarily the interest of the city, nor the interest of the park board, and having staff report to the city or the park board means that the Board of Estimate will struggle to function. I mean, every board needs its own staff. We did go to part-time. That seemed to have worked. We had really good staff to help us do that. But I mean, the Board of Estimate does have its own swim lane, despite the, I mean, it's a small swim lane, but it is a swim lane. And I do think that we need staff. We're already not particularly well paid. And the idea that we would be having to do many of these administrative things by ourselves or with borrowed staff who reported to somebody else just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, we do have a role here. So I appreciate the thought and the idea, Mr. Fletcher, but I do agree with also Mr. French's comments that just like the park board, that the board has its own role and needs its own staff.
Well, and just to put a touch of history into this whole thing, when I was first elected 12 years ago, it was put before the voters of the city of Minneapolis whether or not the Board of Estimate and Taxation should continue. And there was about a 66.3% vote in favor of keeping the Board of Estimate and Taxation. And not everybody was probably around for that history because it was a while ago. But that independent Board of Estimate and Taxation has been around for over 100 years. And I appreciate your willingness, Mr. Fletcher, to go forward with this. I think there's nothing wrong with having future discussions. We have a motion. We have a motion before us. Unless it's something that's very germane to this, I would just go forward. 150
years, Mr. Wheeler,
Okay.
not 100. Thank you.
Well, you know what's half a century. Okay, very good. So the motion is before us. No further discussion. I would ask that we call the roll.
Board Member Fry.
Aye.
Board Member French. Board Member French.
Oops, sorry, I forget to unmute. Aye.
Board Member Bender.
Aye.
Board Member Fletcher.
Aye.
Vice President Becker.
Aye.
President Wheeler.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Very good. Now, I believe there's no other business before us. And if you are willing to be part of the interview team for the new staff person, please be in touch with me after the meeting or by email or by phone call. That would be fine. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved?
Second?
Moved and seconded, and I don't think we need to have a vote on this one. I think it's pretty unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for attending. Appreciate your time, and we will see you next time we meet. Thanks. Meeting adjourned.